The legendary John Oates on the phone with me this morning, half of Hall Oates, a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. John, this is a big deal for somebody like me who's played your music my entire life. And the first time I heard some of your records, man, I just fell in love. When you hear that together with Daryl Hall, you guys are the best-selling musical duo of all time, how do you put that into words?
Just like that.
Just like that? You just say it out loud? Because, man, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't know what else to say. Listen, that's a stat that somebody checked out in radio or some Billboard magazine or something figured it out, and I think it's amazing to be able to put that on your resume. Hey, you know what? But when it all comes down to it, I just feel like a musician who plays their instrument and sings.
Yeah,
that's my job.
That is so cool. And that's why I love this tour that you have coming up, and an evening of songs and stories with John Oates featuring Guthrie Trapp, because this is, we can all sing I Can't Go For That, Rich Girl, Maneater, but there's some really interesting stories behind these songs that a lot of people might not know, right, John?
That's right. And that this is an opportunity. What Guthrie and I do is, we wanted to bring the living room onto the stage and play just like we would play if the two of us were sitting in our living room. And that's what we do. We have, there's no equipment, no amps, no nothing like that, just two acoustic guitars. And I go back to the earliest influences, the music that made me who I am as I, developed as a young musician, as a kid. And we go back to and play a lot of roots music, a lot of music that I think is very important to the kind of the history and the development of American popular music, way before rock and roll, and then leading up to, a lot of course, my solo stuff, and then of course we play a couple Hall & Oates hits as well. But everything's done in an acoustic kind of reimagined way. And
it seems like it's done in such an intimate way, too. It's like intimate settings, intimate venues. For example, here in New England, I know March 18th, they're at the Colonial Theater in Laconia, New Hampshire. The Norwood Theater in Norwood, Mass. on the 19th, and Ridgefield Playhouse as well. So these are intimate theaters, intimate shows, and it sounds like it was designed that way on purpose. When I read what you and Guthrie have planned, it's an intimate storytelling kind of feel, right?
Yeah, we purposely picked these very old music-oriented theaters. A lot of these theaters, in fact, some of the songs that we're going to be playing from the 1920s and 1930s were probably played in these theaters back in the day when they were new. So these theaters are perfect acoustically. They are the right vibe and the right atmosphere for the type of show that we're doing.
So what were some of those songs when you were growing up and when you were really getting into music, especially singer-songwriter stuff? What are some of your influences early on that maybe we wouldn't expect? Because everybody's going to say the Beatles, right? We all know that. Everybody's going to say maybe, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. But what would you say early on were some influences that you probably touched during this tour?
Well, believe it or not, Simon and Garfunkel and the Beatles are probably the least of my influences.
Right. That's why I brought that up.
No, I was, it's cool. I come from a completely different tradition. I'm old enough to remember music before rock and roll.
Right.
My parents were World War II generation. And, when I was growing up as a little kid, all I heard was big band music and swing and ragtime and stuff like that. And so when rock and roll began in the early 50s, I was very aware that something new had happened. And, of course, I jumped right on it being a young guitar player playing Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Elvis and, Buddy Holly. So the earliest days of rock and roll, moving up through the folk revival in the late 1950s, early 1960s, where I got to, see firsthand some of these incredible musicians like Mississippi John Hurt, Doc Watson, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee were coming to Philadelphia and playing the coffee houses. And they really influenced me because I began to make the connection between the early American roots music that evolved into what became rock and roll. And that's kind of a little bit of the arc of the story that we tell during this show.
Yeah, it sounds like I can hear in your voice, John, all the passion you have for these artists. I can really hear that you get really charged about it. So I have to ask, when you were making, you're still making hits today, but when the height of the Hall & Oates, when that was happening, the height of that, was there a lot of pressure to write a certain way? Because it sounds like you've got all these influences that might not have at the time in the 80s, 70s, 80s, wouldn't have fit the genre at the time. Was that frustrating at all, or did that not even bother you because, hey man, you're Hall & Oates, you're having a great time? You know what I mean?
Listen, I during the as Daryl and I got together, you know,
Right.
in the late 60s as friends, and then in the early 70s as actual professional, you know, partners, I think he shelved a lot of his personal influences, and I shelved a lot of my personal influences. And what we did is we came together on things that were kind of where we really mutually kind of meshed. And that became the sound of Hall & Oates.
Right.
So over the years, you know, I never really got to express a lot of the
Exactly.
roots music and the stuff that I'm doing now. But, you know, to answer your question about, you know, having pressure to kind of replicate your hits or, you know, keep it going, the song, I Can't Go For That, a lot of people don't know what that's about. But what that song's really about is about not bending to the pressure of the record companies and radio and management and agents and trying to tell you what to do, and just saying, no, I'm going to do what we want. And that's what that song's about. So, yeah, there was a lot of pressure, of course. When you become successful, there's always external pressure to make you try to, you know, hey, do that again. Well,
Right.
you know, creative people don't like to do that again.
Exactly.
They want to do something different.
Exactly. John, the tour again, it's a 7-city tour. It's called An Evening of Songs and Stories with John Oates featuring Guthrie Trapp. And it kicks off on the 16th of March. I'll give those dates for the local shows as well. One last question for you, John. We got to wrap up. I've always wanted to ask you this. It's so funny. When you shaved your iconic mustache, were you surprised at the amount? I mean, there's actually a band about that out there now. What was it about that mustache that like made people? I mean, were you surprised by that? It's an iconic thing, and it's just a mustache. You and Tom Selleck. It's like, what is up with that?
I know.
And you resented it, didn't you?
That's what I always said. I said, people, it's just facial hair. You know, it was one of those things. It became bigger than, you know, it became more of an image than actually I was as a person.
Right.
You know, it almost took over my personality. And then, you know, I had a change of life in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of things changed for me personally, you know,
Sure.
you know, domestically, professionally. And the mustache for me was a symbol of the old days.
Right.
So I just shaved it off.
Right. Right, and it made a lot of people cry. But John, we're glad that you're back with this tour, and we're glad that you're in New England too. I'll give those dates again. John Oates on the show. Thanks so much, John, for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much.